Iwo Jima, February 19th, 1945. Colonel Takechi Nishi stands in the reinforced concrete command bunker of the 26th Tank Regiment, studying intelligence reports that fill him with growing confidence about Japanese defensive preparations. The reports detail an intricate network of underground fortifications that has taken 8 months to construct, pillboxes, tunnels, and bunkers carved from volcanic rock and reinforced with steel and concrete, that Japanese engineers believe can withstand anything the American Navy can throw at them. What Colonel Nishi cannot possibly know, what no Japanese officer could imagine in their most detailed defensive planning, is that American ordnance engineers have developed a weapon specifically designed to crack open fortified positions like eggs, and within hours, 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets fired from destroyers offshore will penetrate bunkers that were supposed to be impregnable, turning the island's defensive network into death traps for their own defenders. The Japanese confidence in their fortifications comes from bitter experience learned at Tarawa, Saipan, and the Philippines, where American bombardments, though devastating in their volume, often failed to neutralize well-constructed defensive positions. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commanding all Japanese forces on Iwo Jima, has implemented lessons learned from previous island battles, abandoning the traditional strategy of defending at the beach in favor of defense in depth, using interconnected fortified positions. His engineers have carved more than 1,500 rooms and tunnels into Mount Suribachi and the island's central plateau, creating a three-dimensional battlefield where Japanese defenders can move unseen between positions, emerging to fire on American forces before disappearing again into the volcanic rock. The construction of these fortifications represents the most sophisticated defensive engineering the Imperial Japanese Army has attempted in the Pacific War. Major Yoshitaka Hori, the chief engineering officer, has supervised the installation of reinforced concrete walls up to 4 feet thick in key positions, steel doors weighing over 750 pounds to seal tunnel entrances, and ventilation systems that allow defenders to survive prolonged bombardments. The largest bunkers contain multiple rooms connected by corridors, with firing ports carefully positioned to provide interlocking fields of fire, while remaining nearly invisible to attacking forces. Some positions have been carved so deep into the volcanic rock that their designers believe they could withstand direct hits from battleship guns, and the network includes supply rooms, medical stations, and communication centers designed to allow coordinated resistance even if individual positions become isolated. Sergeant Major Ichiro Nakamura, commanding a reinforced bunker complex on the island's central plateau, has spent weeks training his 47-man garrison in the tactics Kuribayashi has prescribed for the coming battle. Each man knows his specific position within the bunker system, understands the pre-arranged signals for coordinated fire, and has been drilled in the movement patterns that will allow them to shift between firing positions without exposing themselves to American observation. The bunker's main firing chamber contains a 47 mm anti-tank gun positioned to cover the likely American landing beaches, with additional positions for 6 heavy machine guns, 12 light machine guns, and rifle positions for the remaining infantry. Storage rooms contain enough ammunition, food, and water for the garrison to fight for weeks without resupply, and the complex connects to 4 separate tunnel systems that provide escape routes if the main position becomes untenable. The psychological preparation of the Japanese defenders reflects the Empire's understanding that Iwo Jima represents a crucial battle in the defense of the homeland. Captain Samaji Inouye, commanding a coastal defense battery of 6-inch guns emplaced in reinforced casements, has explained to his men that American possession of Iwo Jima would provide enemy bombers with fighter escort all the way to Japan's main islands, making their defense of this position essential to protecting their families and emperor. Each defender has been issued a 1,000-stitch belt blessed by Buddhist monks, carries a photograph of the emperor, and has written final letters to be delivered to their families after death. This spiritual preparation combines with practical advantages that Japanese officers believe make their positions nearly impregnable: the volcanic terrain that provides natural camouflage, the interlocking fields of fire from mutually supporting positions, and the depth of fortification that should allow continued resistance even after American forces establish footholds on the island. What makes February 19, 1945, different from previous American amphibious assaults is not immediately apparent to Japanese observers who watched the preliminary bombardment begin. Captain Tsunezo Wachi, commanding the 2nd Mixed Brigade's Artillery Regiment, observes the familiar pattern of American naval gunfire from his position in a reinforced observation bunker on Mount Suribachi's eastern slope. Battleships and cruisers firing at maximum range, destroyers closing to provide direct fire support, and aircraft from multiple carriers conducting bombing and strafing runs that, while impressive in their volume, follow predictable patterns that Japanese defenders have learned to survive by remaining deep in their fortified positions until the bombardment lifts and American landing craft approach the beaches. The development of high-velocity aircraft rockets represents one of the most significant advances in naval ordnance during World War II, born from the recognition that conventional naval gunfire, while devastating against area targets, often proved insufficient for neutralizing specific fortified positions. Commander William S. Parsons, working with the Bureau of Ordnance Research and Development Division, had been studying the problem of bunker penetration since the difficult lessons learned at Tarawa, where Marines discovered that even prolonged naval bombardments left many Japanese defensive positions intact and deadly. The solution emerged from rocket technology originally developed for aircraft use, a 5-inch rocket motor paired with a specially designed warhead that could penetrate concrete and steel before exploding, combining the accuracy of aimed fire with the destructive power needed to collapse underground fortifications. The HVAR, as the high-velocity aircraft rocket became officially designated, fired a 134-pound rocket at velocities exceeding 1,375 feet per second, carrying either a 35-pound high-explosive warhead or a specialized penetrating warhead designed to punch through fortified positions. Unlike conventional naval shells that followed ballistic trajectories, the rocket motor provided sustained acceleration that allowed the weapon to maintain velocity throughout its flight path, delivering kinetic energy equivalent to much larger artillery shells while maintaining accuracy at extended ranges. The psychological effect on defending troops proved as important as the weapon's physical destruction, as Japanese survivors would later describe the terror of hearing the distinctive shriek of incoming rockets followed by explosions that seemed to originate from within their supposedly safe positions. The installation of rocket launchers on destroyers required extensive modifications to accommodate the electrical firing systems and the structural stresses generated by multiple rocket launchers. Lieutenant Commander Robert H. Smith, commanding USS Laffey, had overseen the installation of 60 rocket rails on his destroyer's superstructure, creating what Navy personnel called a rocket ship, capable of delivering devastating firepower against specific targets with unprecedented precision. The launchers could be trained individually or fired in salvos, allowing ships to concentrate multiple rockets on single targets or spread their fire across multiple objectives. Training exercises off California had demonstrated the weapon's effectiveness against concrete targets, with rockets consistently penetrating bunker walls that had resisted conventional naval gunfire, but the true test would come against the elaborate fortifications that Japanese engineers had constructed on Iwo Jima. The tactical employment of rocket-firing destroyers represented a fundamental shift in naval fire support doctrine, moving from area bombardment designed to suppress enemy positions to precision strikes intended to destroy specific defensive installations. Captain Jesse B. Oldendorf, commanding the Fire Support Group for Operation Detachment, had carefully studied intelligence photographs and prisoner interrogations to identify the most critical Japanese positions, creating target lists that prioritized bunkers and strongpoints that could inflict the heaviest casualties on advancing Marines. Each destroyer had been assigned specific sectors and given detailed target information, including estimated ranges, probable construction methods, and recommended approach angles for maximum effectiveness. The rocket attack begins at 0645 hours with USS Laffey and USS O'Brien approaching to within 1,200 yards of the island's eastern beaches, close enough that Japanese observers can clearly see the multiple launch rails protruding from the destroyer's superstructures like the spines of some mechanical sea creature. Lieutenant Hiroshi Takuchi, manning an observation post in a supposedly bomb-proof bunker complex on Mount Suribachi's lower slopes, reports the unusual configuration of American warships to his regimental command post, noting that these vessels appear different from the standard destroyers that have been providing fire support throughout the 3-day preliminary bombardment. What he cannot know is that his own observation post has been identified through photo reconnaissance and marked for destruction by the precise coordinates now being fed into the rocket directors aboard the approaching American ships. The first salvo of 12 rockets streaks toward Mount Suribachi at 0647 hours, their distinctive white smoke trails creating parallel lines across the morning sky that Japanese defenders watch with growing alarm as they realize these weapons are following trajectories unlike any they have observed before. Instead of the high, arcing paths of conventional naval shells, the rockets maintain relatively flat trajectories that bring them directly toward fortified positions at angles that Japanese engineers never considered when designing their defensive works. The impact of the first rockets against the reinforced concrete walls of Lieutenant Takuchi's observation post produces explosions that seem to originate from within the structure itself, as the penetrating warheads punch through 18 inches of reinforced concrete before detonating, creating blast effects that propagate through the bunker's interior spaces with devastating efficiency. Sergeant Major Nakamura, commanding the reinforced bunker complex on the central plateau, feels the first rocket impacts as shock waves that travel through the volcanic rock itself, causing dust to cascade from the ceiling of his command chamber, and creating vibrations that disrupt radio communications with subordinate positions. The systematic nature of the American rocket attack becomes apparent as successive salvos target individual bunkers with precision that suggests detailed intelligence about Japanese defensive positions. Unlike the random pattern of conventional bombardment that allowed defenders to take shelter in the deepest parts of their fortifications, the rocket attacks seem to seek out specific rooms and corridors, with penetrating warheads exploding in spaces that were supposed to be completely protected from external attack. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders proves as devastating as the physical destruction of their positions. Private First Class Kenji Yamamoto, sheltering in what had been considered the safest portion of a coastal defense bunker, describes the terror of watching concrete walls that had seemed impregnable suddenly sprout holes that admitted not just blast and shrapnel, but daylight from outside, creating the horrifying realization that their protective walls had become death traps that concentrated and amplified the effects of American weapons. The sound of approaching rockets creates panic among defenders who had learned to endure conventional bombardments by remaining calm and deep in their fortifications, but who now find themselves helplessly exposed to weapons that can reach them in their supposedly safe positions. The technical superiority of the American rocket system becomes apparent through its ability to engage multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining accuracy that allows individual bunkers to be systematically destroyed. Commander Smith, directing the rocket attack from USS Laffey's bridge, coordinates with spotting aircraft to adjust fire onto specific targets, using radio communications to direct individual rockets onto observation posts, machine gun positions, and command bunkers with unprecedented precision. The sustained rate of fire possible with rocket launchers allows American ships to maintain continuous pressure on Japanese positions, preventing defenders from emerging to man their weapons during brief lulls in bombardment that had characterized previous naval attacks. Captain Inu, commanding the Coastal Defense Battery, attempts to return fire against the American destroyers, but discovers that his gun positions, designed to engage targets at much longer ranges, cannot effectively target the fast-moving ships that approach to within minimum range of his weapons before launching their rockets and then withdrawing beyond effective range of Japanese artillery. The 6-inch coastal guns that were supposed to devastate American landing craft prove nearly useless against the rocket-firing destroyers that can deliver their weapons from ranges and angles that Japanese defensive planners had not anticipated. The few shots that Inu's battery manages to fire fall harmlessly into the ocean as the American ships maneuver unpredictably while maintaining accurate fire against Japanese positions. The destruction of communication systems throughout the Japanese defensive network creates a cascade of tactical failures that demonstrate the rocket weapon's strategic impact, beyond their immediate destructive effects. Major Hori, the chief engineering officer, loses contact with more than 60% of his fortified positions within the first hour of the rocket attack, as penetrating warheads systematically destroy radio equipment, telephone lines, and command posts that had been positioned in supposedly secure locations. The carefully coordinated defensive plan that depended on mutual support between interlocking positions collapses as individual bunkers find themselves isolated and unable to coordinate their fire or call for support from adjacent positions. The armor-piercing capability of the rocket warheads proves particularly devastating against Japanese tanks and artillery pieces that had been emplaced in reinforced positions. Colonel Nishi's Type 95 Hago tanks, positioned in carefully prepared defensive positions with thick concrete walls providing frontal protection, suffer direct hits from rockets that penetrate their improvised armor and detonate inside crew compartments, killing tank crews instantly and destroying vehicles that represented the island's primary mobile reserve. The loss of armored support eliminates the Japanese ability to conduct counterattacks against American landing forces, reducing the defense to static positions that can be systematically eliminated by continued rocket fire. The medical consequences of the rocket attacks exceed anything Japanese medical personnel had prepared for during their extensive planning for the island's defense. Dr. Sueo Saito, the senior medical officer for the 2nd Mixed Brigade, discovers that traditional Japanese battlefield medicine, designed to treat wounds from conventional weapons, proves inadequate for casualties created by rocket warheads that penetrate fortified positions. The confined spaces of bunkers and tunnels amplify blast effects, creating injuries that combine severe trauma from explosion with crushing wounds from collapsing concrete and steel. Medical stations positioned in supposedly secure locations suffer direct hits that eliminate not only medical personnel, but also the wounded, who had been moved to these positions for treatment. The systematic destruction of Japanese defensive positions creates a tactical situation unlike anything experienced in previous Pacific battles, as American rocket fire eliminates strongpoints that were expected to inflict heavy casualties on attacking Marines throughout days or weeks of fighting. Lieutenant Colonel Takeichi Nishi, realizing that his carefully prepared defensive positions are being systematically destroyed by weapons against which he has no effective defense, attempts to reorganize his remaining forces for mobile defense, using the island's natural terrain features. However, the rocket-firing destroyers prove capable of engaging moving targets as effectively as fixed positions, using spotting aircraft to direct fire against Japanese troops attempting to move between positions. The naval rocket attack continues for 3 hours, with multiple destroyers rotating through firing positions to maintain continuous pressure on Japanese defensive installations throughout the island. By 0945 hours, when the rocket bombardment finally ceases to allow American landing forces to approach the beaches, more than 80% of the major Japanese fortified positions have suffered direct hits from penetrating warheads, with many bunkers completely collapsed and their defenders killed or wounded. The elaborate defensive network that had taken 8 months to construct lies in ruins, its interconnected tunnels blocked by debris, its firing positions destroyed, and its command structure eliminated. The immediate tactical impact of the rocket bombardment becomes apparent as American Marines begin their assault on the island's beaches. Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, leading the first wave of Marines ashore, encounters Japanese defensive positions that are largely silent, their crews either killed in the rocket attacks or trapped in collapsed bunkers unable to man their weapons. The interlocking fields of fire that Japanese planners had counted on to devastate American landing forces prove ineffective when the positions creating those fields have been systematically destroyed by weapons that could reach defenders in their supposedly impregnable fortifications. The psychological effect on surviving Japanese defenders proves as significant as the physical destruction of their positions. Those defenders who survive the initial rocket attacks find themselves isolated in damaged bunkers, unable to communicate with higher command, and facing the realization that their most secure positions offer no protection against American weapons. The morale that had been built up through months of preparation and spiritual conditioning collapses, as defenders recognize that their defensive preparations no matter how elaborate or well constructed, cannot protect them from weapons specifically designed to defeat fortified positions. The strategic implications of the rocket attack extend beyond the immediate tactical advantages gained by American forces, demonstrating a new approach to amphibious warfare that combines precision weapons with detailed intelligence to systematically eliminate defensive positions before landing forces come ashore. The success of the rocket bombardment at Iwo Jima influences American planning for subsequent operations, including the proposed invasion of Japan itself, as military planners recognize that even the most elaborate defensive preparations can be defeated by weapons designed specifically to penetrate fortified positions. The Japanese survivors of the rocket attack, those few who managed to escape from destroyed bunkers, or who were positioned in locations that avoided direct hits, face the demoralizing reality that their year of preparation has been largely negated in a few hours of precision bombardment. Sergeant Major Nakamura, emerging from the ruins of his bunker complex with only 8 of his original 47-man garrison still alive and able to fight, attempts to establish new defensive positions using natural terrain features, but discovers that the rocket-firing destroyers can engage these improvised positions as effectively as they destroyed the elaborate fortifications that had taken months to construct. The technical lessons learned from the rocket attack at Iwo Jima influence not only immediate tactical modifications, but also the development of new weapons and tactics for future operations. The demonstrated effectiveness of precision bombardment against specific targets leads to accelerated development of guided weapons and improved target acquisition systems, while the psychological impact on defending troops validates the concept of weapons designed not just to kill enemy soldiers, but to destroy their confidence in their protective measures and their ability to resist American attacks. The final assessment of the rocket attack's effectiveness comes not from American after-action reports, but from Japanese communications intercepted during the battle, as surviving commanders report to higher headquarters that their defensive positions have been systematically destroyed by American weapons against which they have no effective defense. The resignation in these communications, the acknowledgement that elaborate preparations have been rendered ineffective in a matter of hours, demonstrates the rocket attack's success not just as a tactical innovation, but as a psychological weapon that destroys enemy morale along with their fortifications. The Battle of Iwo Jima continues for 36 more days after the initial rocket bombardment, but the character of the fighting changes fundamentally from the elaborate defensive plan Japanese commanders had envisioned to a desperate struggle by isolated survivors fighting from improvised positions without coordination or effective command structure. The rocket attack that opens the battle demonstrates that even the most sophisticated defensive preparations can be defeated by weapons specifically designed to penetrate fortified positions, forever changing the nature of amphibious warfare and providing American forces with a tactical advantage that proves decisive in one of the Pacific War's bloodiest battles.